What a fabulous introduction. Thank you very much indeed. And it's great to be here with you in Berlin. Some of you might have seen that over the last couple of weeks I've been traveling extensively in the United States, in Canada, in other events on behalf of CoachHub speaking. And of course, you've probably also noticed that there's been lots of changes that have been happening in the UK over the last few weeks. We seem to be getting through prime ministers at an alarming rate. Now, you could correlate that with the fact that we've left the European Union. Or you could correlate that. You could correlate that with other factors that are going on. But I phoned my daughter just as I was going to be setting off from Canada to fly back. And I said, hey, darling, are you okay? She's 11. And she's quite interested in politics and what's going on. And she said, Daddy, it's so exciting. I thought, oh, what are you going to say? She said, Daddy, it's only 2 more prime ministers until Christmas. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be telling jokes the whole time, but I'm going to talk about science and evidence as a professor of psychology, somebody who is fascinated by impact and evidence and how we can use that impact and evidence to help us, to help you ensure that coaching delivers the outcomes that you want for your organization, for your people, is critical and is going to be the focus for the next 40 minutes of this presentation. But let me start, I suppose, by asking you a question. Do you care about your people? I mean, do you really care about them? Just think about that question seriously and for one moment. Do you really care about them? Now, I suspect that you do. Now, of course, as a psychologist, I could say, well, I trust you. I rely upon your word. But actually I don't, because I'm a psychologist. I want evidence. I want evidence to say that we as humans truly care. Now, I knew the venue that we were coming to today, and as a result, I brought a little thing along with me. This is a human bone. It's a femur, so it's part of the human body. It's only a copy, so don't worry, although I was slightly concerned going through security and whether I would be stopped for smuggling human remains. I didn't, because they too realized that it was only a copy. But what's unusual about this unique bone is that it's 15,000 years old. It's a copy of a 15,000-year-old femur that was discovered in a dig by archaeologists. And as they looked at this, something amazing emerged. What's distinctive about this bone is the damage that you can see to the bone and the healing that took place. So it's abnormal in that sense compared to many other. This individual was probably out in a hunter-gatherer society, hunting, and unlike his or her colleagues when they were returning home, this person, probably a pig or something else, a wild boar or a deer, ran into them and broke their leg. For any other species, maybe a little bird or a lower level mammal might stay with that other colleague, that other family member, that other member of the group for a few minutes. Higher species might stay there for a few hours. But for anybody, any species that breaks their bone in this particular way, they can't move. They can't walk easily. They can't access water. They can't defend themselves. They can't run away from the predators. They can't feed themselves. They are a liability to their group. So other species leave them behind. They're lunch or dinner for the other predators. This individual wasn't. Somebody in that group who they were hunting with cared for them. They picked them up, they took them back into the group for hours, for days, for weeks, for months. They looked out for them. They got food and water. They supported them as they got that bone healed to exercise before they rejoined the tribe, rejoined the hunter group to go and collect food in months' time before they were once again a productive individual. I would argue this is a fantastic piece of evidence that we as humans care. I suspect this piece of evidence illustrates that we as humans care for our people. But it's not the only thing that sets us apart. We are distinctive as a species because there are other factors too. We care, yes, but we're also critical thinkers. We want to think about the learning from yesterday and how we can plan to do things differently tomorrow. Now that enables us to be highly productive, but it also means sometimes that we worry in a way that maybe other species don't worry about, will there be enough fruit for me to pick tomorrow, thinks the chimpanzee. Probably not. But we as humans have those negative thoughts can get in the way of our performance, as well as using those in a way to enhance our productivity and our performance. We're also distinctive in the way that we use language. We can think about past and future. We can plan using that reflective skill, that conscious awareness, and we can also engage in developmental conversations, coaching conversations that help people to develop the plans to really deliver. Now, over coaching, probably many of us think, well, coaching's pretty new. Matty this morning said, CoachHub is 4 years old. Here it is. This is coaching. But of course, we know that coaching goes back farther than this. We know that coaching, is that going to work for me? No. Can somebody slip the next slide, if that's possible? I don't know why that is not working. Thank you very much. So we know, looking at human history, that coaching certainly goes back 20, 30 years. But I would argue that coaching probably goes back 50 or maybe 15,000 years from the example that I'm illustrating. That we as humans were probably coaching each other to learn, not just by directing and telling our peers in our hunter-gatherer societies, this is how you do something, but intuitively, indigenous First Nation people, the evidence when you look at colonies in Africa, examples of communities, Maori communities, for example, often are using these reflective conversations to help people to develop an insight as well as a connection to their colleagues within their tribe, within their community. So I argue that this community of coaching is something that is part of what we are as being human to help us to develop. Then we saw a pivot point from that conversation that was just being used without really probably much serious consideration, but we moved into classical societies. And here I'm talking about Socrates, Plato, the Greek philosophers, who started to recognize that this reflective dialogue could be immensely useful in a formalized way for learning. In fact, Socrates was so powerful, so challenging in his reflective conversations that made the leaders of his society, the Greek leaders, made him drink poison. Now, hopefully, the CoachHub coaches are not so challenging for your people that it leads them to having to drink poison. But we do have that conversation that provides a sense of challenge as part of what it is to be a coach. Then we saw a third pivot point that was happening in this 10,000 plus year history of coaching, what I describe as the professionalization of coaching. And this professionalization of coaching saw the emergence of professional bodies, development of training standards, of ethics, of coach competencies, and an identity where people started to step forward and say, I am a coach. And that period during the 1980s and 1990s, with the formation of the International Coaching Federation, with the EMCC, a professional body who themselves have 25,000 members across Europe and across the world, these standards help create quality and consistency. Now, I would argue that we're at another pivot point in history, a change that is sweeping across the coaching industry. In the past, all of that coaching was for the elites, for individuals who could afford the executive coach to travel to them. The executive coach was very much a perk, a benefit for senior leaders to help them to continue to perform. But democratization, the ability to bring a digital solution, enables coaching to be offered just not for a few people, but for the many. And I think that pivot point is beginning to revolutionize coaching, not only to democratize it, but to bring that opportunity for all employees to have those reflective conversations that help them to get better at their performance, while signaling from us as employers, as HR people, that we care about our colleagues. Now, not surprisingly, at CoachHub, we are thought leaders in this particular space. We continue to research, to write, to publish, to collaborate with you, to help you to imagine how coaching can be used, to measure how coaching has an impact on your individuals and your organizations. And I'll talk about that in a moment or two. But we've set out our definition of what we think digital coaching is. At CoachHub, we think digital coaching is technology-based. It's about a live, so it's synchronous conversations between the coach and the coachee. It is enabled by secure digital communications that have both audio and video features. Because what's important is not only hearing the words that people say, but also seeing their whole body language, getting their facial expressions, getting all of that detail to help them to develop a deeper understanding of themselves and their situations. And because it's digital, it's scalable, and it's more easy for us to collaborate with you to provide that data that helps you to measure the impact and the outcomes of coaching at an individual and at an organizational level. So when you're thinking about coaching, when you're looking at the evidence, we have plenty of that to collaborate with you. And check out more details on our website for things like this, and our publications about Research Bulletin that helps you to understand more of the science. But let me, in the next 20 minutes, just explore a little bit about measurement. And measurement is one of those things that we could be exploring from a number of different dimensions. We can certainly look at it from an individual perspective. How does the individual feel, or how does the individual change as a result of the coaching work that we're doing with them? But I think it's important that we pay attention as well to the work of people like Richard Kilberg. And Richard highlights to us the importance that coaching is not just an individual perk. Yes, of course, it needs to serve the needs of the individual, but it also needs to serve the needs of the organization. So when we think about metrics, we need to bring those elements together into a harmony to measure both aspects, to think about the individual gain and the organizational benefit. So I'm going to share with you just 3 ways that you can think about that, taking account of the individual and the organizational need. I'm going to be looking at randomized controlled trials. I'll tell you a little bit more about what they are. I'll tell you a little bit about ROI, so the return on investment metrics, and I'm also going to look at a case study examples as part of helping you think about measurement or building a business case for its use. Let's start with the first of these. The first of these are randomized controlled trials. So randomized controlled trials are the gold standard in science research. If any of you have taken the COVID vaccine, if any of you have ever taken a painkiller, if any of you have then taken any medicine during the course of your life, you would imagine that the authorities who regulate the prescription of drugs, of which ones are allowed and which ones are not, which ones can make claims and which ones can't, it's a highly regulated field. The field requires evidence, and the evidence standard, the gold standard, is a randomized controlled trial. And essentially, a randomized controlled trial is a group of people, let's take you as a population, and without that group's knowledge, they're cut into 2 groups. One group get intervention A, whatever it is, a tablet that treats COVID, and another group don't. They just get a water tablet. No one knows which group that they're in. In fact, the person who gives them the drug, just in case There's a concern that they might give it away. They don't know. Only the researchers behind the scenes know which person is in which particular group. And then we measure the effect. How many people COVID, how many people in COVID, and see whether the drug that's being prescribed, a painkiller or a COVID vaccine or whatever that might be, does it make a difference on people's health outcomes, the number of people who contract COVID or about their sensations of pain. We expect those high standards in medicine, and we should expect the same standards in relation to coaching. Coaching should be as evidence-based, using a gold standard for science and measurement, just as in any other intervention, whether that is medicine, counseling, or others. Now, I'm pleased to say that in coaching, there has been over the last 20 years a whole selection of randomized controlled trials that gives me and you the confidence to go away and say, I know that coaching is a great solution in these specific instances. And there are a host. There are more than 30 examples of these randomized controlled trials. Now, being a psychologist, I begged the organizers of the event, could I not have a 4-hour slot to give them the detail of randomized controlled trials and all of that evidence? And they said, no, Jonathan, you can spend 10 minutes on that. So, as a result, you've just got one slide very briefly summarizing half a dozen examples. Now, no doubt, you can very quickly scan that, even take a photo of it, and give you some examples of where coaching makes a difference. And you can see sickness, absence. Coaching seems to make a positive effect on reducing absence. Probably that's to do with employee engagement and people feeling more motivated and more connected to their workplace. They've still got the same cold, but some people choose a duvet day, and other people are saying, do you know what, I'm going to get out of bed, I'm going to connect in online. I'll keep away from my colleagues that I won't spread the virus or germ that I have, but I'm still going to make progress with my work. A study that I did with a colleague, we looked at a comparison of coaching versus directive learning. Randomized controlled trial, over 200 participants, and what we found in this study, maybe to my delight, maybe also to my surprise, was coaching was more effective and more efficient than a directive telling style of learning. A little bit more evidence around that. So what we found was that individuals who went through the coaching-based intervention had fewer hours of learning by about 30%, and the pass rate, in other words, people achieving the required learning standard, also went up by just over 25%. So it reduced the time and it improved the outcome of the learning in comparison to a directive style of teaching. Now you might think, well, that's weird, why is that the case? The reason for that, we hypothesized in the paper, was to do the fact that each person starts with a different learning need. One of us might already know quite a lot about the subject, so we can start from that level of knowledge. Somebody else might be starting from down here, so that this person doesn't need as much input. And secondly, because it's about focusing on what the individual's needs are, some people might need to focus on one aspect, somebody else needs to focus on another aspect. Because across a syllabus, there are a variety of things that an individual needs to learn, whether that's being a leader or a manager or using a new piece of software. So the coaching style demonstrated it was highly effective and highly efficient as a learning methodology. Leadership development, exactly the same evidence. Building leadership competencies, coaching demonstrates that it's a highly effective tool in relation to this. When it comes to well-being, another randomized control trial, evidence here in terms of well-being, coaching can help with well-being outcomes. And as a side measure, in this particular study, they also illustrated that it improved individuals' gratitude. So a sense of, thank you very much, I really like being part of this team, and appreciation. Job satisfaction, organizational commitment, that links to that first sickness study that I talked about. Evidence from this randomized control, positive impact of coaching. And the last example, Eric DeHaan's work. Eric works at Ashridge, and a number of studies that he's conducted, and we've seen this in multiple studies in terms of goal attainment. Coaching is fantastic at improving goal attainment. So individuals not only clarify what their goal is, but they then develop a plan, and because it comes from within them, not surprisingly, their commitment is increased, because the coach helps them to think through how they move towards that goal. Not only are they more committed to it, but they're more likely to achieve that goal because they have a step-by-step approach to achieving the goal. So for a variety of reasons, evidenced by randomized controlled trials, coaching builds the business case to demonstrate value. And once again, behavioral scientist colleagues that I work with will be very happy to sit down with you to think about what's unique in your organization where coaching should be making a difference, and how we can work with you to build that evidence, that business case for you to demonstrate impact in the specific use case that you have. Now, meta-analysis is another area that I love to engage with. This is almost averaging the randomized controlled trials that I've just been talked about here. And there have been 7 meta-analysis studies that have been done over the last 10 years. Here's one from Tim Teboom, who's based in Amsterdam. And what this does is average together all of those randomized controlled trials. Because one of the challenges that you might have put in your head was, well, that might work in manufacturing, but how might that relate to retail? Or that might work in financial services, but how does that relate to my specific not-for-profit organization? So by putting these together and averaging out the figures and clustering the different types of measurement is what Tim and his team did, we can see against performance, well-being, coping, goal attainment, as well as attitudes, how an average score would be. And you might be very familiar with meta-analysis, or you might be less familiar with it, what these figures demonstrate to us is that coaching has a moderate effect size, which is very comparable with the outcomes that we see for mentoring, appraisals, and training. So if you're not using coaching in your organization, the obvious question would be, why not? Because the evidence would show you that from a meta-analysis, this average of multiple studies, that it will produce positive effects in performance, generalization, and also in well-being. And we could break that down into specific aspects, such as goal attainment or in terms of absence. So we're seeing the same results when we do this for online as you might be in face-to-face. So the evidence would be concluding that we should be focusing on coaching as part of our HR strategies. Now, another challenge that people sometimes say to me is, well, it's a little bit of a perk because I've got 50,000 people in my organization and I can't give coaching for 50,000 people. I can only give it for 50 or for 500 or for 5,000. Fantastic, because there's a lovely study by colleagues at Sydney University. Sean O'Connor and Michael Kavanagh did a study that looked at what they described as the ripple effect. And the ripple effect is a little bit like when you throw a stone into a pond and you see it ripple out. It seems, from this study that they did, coaching has that effect. We might coach one person, but because their goal attainment, their leadership skills, their levels of engagement are enhanced, and also because they adopt more of a coaching style with their team, it appears that coaching ripples out and has a positive effect on their colleagues in their immediate team, but also many of us work in matrix organizations. And as a result, that coaching effect, that ripple effect, that positivity spreads out across the organization. So when you're thinking about coaching, even when you're coaching 550 or 500, it's likely that you're impacting not just those 5, but 25. You're not coaching 50 people, but a ripple effect will spread that to 250 people. Great piece of evidence to show the spread and positivity, the love, the care that coaching can give beyond you in HR commissioning that piece. Second example I wanted to talk about is ROI, so return on investment. Have a look at this data. And you're looking at that, and I can see the facial expressions. A lady in the front row here, she's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. That's a big range, isn't it? 788, 300 and something or other, 300 and, let's have a turn around, 321. Wow, that's a big range. Why is it such a range? Well, the reality for return on investment is that the range varies because the type of organizations vary, and the type of people being coached in these different studies has varied, and because the estimates vary. Now, this particular set of data that is included here is published in magazines or claims that are made from individual studies. But as I'm a scientist, I'm always very skeptical. And my skepticism, my critical nature, means that I want to say, show me the formula that you've used. Show me the assumptions that you've made, so I can repeat that and validate the study. That's what good science does. So if in a medicine journal, or a COVID journal, or in a science journal, the method is published and is open for scrutiny. Now, on none of these studies, let me repeat that, on none of these studies was the formula, the method described with sufficient detail. None of the assumptions were clearly articulated that enable you or me to repeat this research. So as a science study, if I was editing a journal and had this, it would go into the bin. Now, that's not to say that this can't provide us with some interesting insights. And in fact, at CoachHub, we wanted to do exactly that. We first of all commissioned an external partner, Forrester. We used their methodology that we asked them to publish in full, so you as a reader could see that methodology. And thirdly, we asked them to openly publish all of the assumptions that they were making, which were based on interviews with a sample of our clients at CoachHub, and you can download for free on our website the Total Economic Impact Report that allows you to see the CoachHub return on investment, full, transparent, and independent. So if anybody talks to you about ROI, ask them the question. So what was the methodology? What were the assumptions? We'd like to see behind this, because the reality is there's a lot of fake claims that are made, and only when we see evidence, transparency, and openness can we validate those claims. Please download our report. I'd really be interested to hear from you about your views. My colleagues in behavioral science would be happy to talk with you about your unique circumstances, because every client is different, and every circumstance is unique about the use case or how that population might be different, and the intervention might be different to your organization compared with another. So let me talk about the third aspect. The third aspect is in relation to case studies. And of course, we know when we talk to people that people love coaching. I was speaking to somebody this morning, and they were telling me the experience that they had over coffee, where their employees came to them. And that particular employee said, I'd come back into the workplace. I was so delighted with my coaching. And they cried. They cried about how fantastic it was that someone was listening to them. Let me give you two real, genuine cases. I've changed the name to protect the individuals. But the first of those is Jens, an executive coaching assignment where we're working with him on building the alignment across his senior team. So we came into coaching thinking, well, I want to make sure that my colleagues in my organization are fully aligned. I want to make sure that there is a connection. But as we started to speak, and we met 3 or 4 times in the work that I was doing as an executive coach, what became interesting was the amount of stress he was carrying. COVID, organizational change, the pressures of quarter-by-quarter reporting. You know those issues. Probably you experience them each and every day in your organization. The demands from your line manager, your boss, your stakeholders to say, if you've run that last lap in 60 seconds, now run it in 59. And you run round in 59. And then they say to you, come on, run round in 58, or 57, or 56, or 55, or 54. It's exhausting. And being at the top of an organization is even more exhausting. Now, on about the 4th or 5th coaching conversation. What was unusual on that particular occasion is Jens said, I'm really getting this neck ache. It's just over the last few weeks that I'm experiencing this. Since the last time I met, that's interesting. Have you been playing sport? And we explored a few hypotheses around this. We talked about his sense of well-being. And I just wondered, I was like, okay, what's going on here? So I don't usually step in to give advice, but my advice in this situation was, I think you ought to go and see your doctor. Just go and book an appointment this week and go and have a conversation with that. It's unusual that this is happening. I got a text message about 10 days later from Jens. He was in hospital. And he said, you might have just saved my life. Like, wow. What had happened was, 2 days later, he'd made an appointment. He'd been to see the doctor the next day. And the doctor said, that's really worrying. Let me just send you for a scan. He went down to the hospital, and the hospital completed a scan of him, and they whipped him straight into an operation where he had a triple heart bypass operation. The anxiety that they had was that stress and that pressure had been building up, and he was probably on the verge of a heart attack. Now, I didn't know that. I just thought, that's interesting. Maybe this is something. I can provide a space of well-being, but sometimes the body just gives us little clues about what's going on. And having a colleague, having a coach who was able to sit, to listen, to really listen to what he was saying, to be the sole focus of my attention, enabled just the mirror to be held up as I just have a little think about this. Have a little think about this. What might be important for you? And in that instance, probably saved his life. Second example that I wanted to share with you is Anna. Anna's a relatively new leader in an organization when I was working with her on a women's development program, and was part of a group of individuals who were referred for leadership skills, helping her to build her confidence and step up into this new leadership role. What emerged during our conversations was it isn't only about the capability to stand up here. As I was sitting down here just waiting for that introduction, which still is echoing in my head. In that situation, people can come up and perform. There are a set of things that you do. Practically, you're probably, because you're reflective human beings, analyzing me now, analyzing this presentation. You might be saying things like, wow, he is so cool. How could he not be anxious at this? But the truth is, of course I'm anxious. My heart rate is probably at about 120. My palms are sweaty, as is the rest of my body. It's probably data you didn't need to know, isn't it? But those are natural human responses to a situation that is putting me in a high-stress position where I'm performing two roles. One is that I need to educate, so I'm providing data and information for you, because I'm a professor, I should give you information and knowledge. But I'm also, it's the graveyard slot, we call it. Sorry, no pun intended. But in that, I'm also required to entertain. So all of that thought process that is going on in my head, I know the techniques, but I also need to manage not just those techniques, I also need to manage the confidence, the belief that I can do this. For Anna, she had all of the skills. She knew how to prepare a presentation. What's an introduction, maybe a little bit of a warm-up. In my case, a joke about a British Prime Minister. Thought would go down well with a German audience. You know, a little bit of a joke, given the venue where we are, always goes down well. And in these situations, you want to provide a little bit of a structure for the 30 minutes or so that we have together. So as a presenter, there's a format. Anna knew all of that format. But in her head, she was going, not sure I can do that. It's this lady who'll be in the front row. She'll be looking critically at me. What will she be thinking? She might be thinking, oh, I don't like that suit. Oh, I'm not really sure you've done your hair very well today, Anna. All of those things, for each one of us, can get in the way of our performance. Those inhibiting thoughts, those negative, nagging comments that prevent us stepping forward into new opportunities. So if, in the work that we did with her, was simply based on building her behaviors, helping her to be more effective at her presentation competence, that wouldn't have been enough. We also need to, in coaching, help individuals to explore the confidence of their ability to manage those negative thoughts and to have the confidence to step forward. To identify what are those negative beliefs that are getting in the way. What are those thoughts that are inhibiting your optimal best self stepping forward into a presentation? So by identifying them, to help her to then dispute them, what's the evidence for that? Tell me about a time when you did present really well. Tell me about a time when you were highly effective. Tell me about what you did. Shifting that conversation away from the negative past beliefs into future beliefs about the possibilities, drawing on the strengths to enable her to then identify effective outcomes, effective plans, to more enable her to present in a highly engaging way, managing away those unhelpful thoughts and moving into a space where she was confident and thus illustrated her full capability. Great outcome for an individual, and you play that across multiple individuals in an organization, you get multiple gains. For individual cases, we can go and talk to Jens and to Anna and ask them about their experience with the relationship with their coach, an important factor, but also help them to think about what were their measurable objectives and their goals, and how did they as an individual move towards them. So when you think about evaluation, thinking at an organizational level is critical, but also combining that with an individual level, because the individuals make up the organization. Measuring coaching at both levels is what we would argue. So as I start to think about drawing some of those threads together, and maybe set out for you a menu of when you might use coaching. And of course, many of you are already using coaching in your organizations, and you're probably thinking, what next? For others of you, maybe you have not made that step into applying digital coaching into your organization. And you might be asking the question, what should be my first step? Of course, each you has a different pain point. Each of you will be thinking, what are the current challenges that we have here? And of course, they're different from the person who might be sitting on the opposite side of the room. So here are just 8 things, 8 use cases that you could give consideration to. 8 where you could be applying those. And of course, that varies widely, but the evidence tells us these are 8 great areas where you might start or step into next. Coaching and the evidence for coaching is fantastic when it comes to transitions, helping individuals transform themselves from one role, maybe in a technical role, into their first-line supervisor leader role. Maybe stepping up from that supervisor role into the next one. That could happen before the promotion, or it could be as part of the promotion process. So as they have their first 100 or 150 days to support them navigating their way through this new role and the new expectations that you and their stakeholders have towards them. I've shown you evidence about how coaching can improve leadership competencies. So not surprisingly, coaching is fantastic as part of a leadership development. Taking the generalized content from a leadership program and applying that to you as a unique individual. What's relevant to you? How do you bring that to life in your day-to-day activities as a leader? Skills development, how we would turn new knowledge into new habits. There might be new systems, new processes that are happening in your organization. Transformational change as you pivot or respond to that changing environment that we're seeing that's going to be played out in 2023 as a result of that economic consequences that all of us are experiencing probably through this winter and that will play out through the whole of 2023. Helping people to pivot, to change, develop the skills that they will need in that new business context. The fourth one on my list is about women's development, but it could be more generally about diversity and inclusion. It could be about D&I, it could be neurodiversity, but there's good evidence from research studies that have been done, particularly around women, as all of us seek to create more equal and just workplaces where everybody can thrive, everybody can succeed, everybody can flourish. I think one of the aspects that we certainly will be changing and engaging with over the coming year is organizational change. If we had a lot of that over the last 2 to 3 years, I suspect that over the next 2 to 3 years, that isn't going to diminish. We will still have to reposition our organizations for these new economic consequences. That's in relation to inflation, in relation to power and energy uses, and I know how that's playing out here in Germany. It's playing out exactly the same in Europe too. Mergers and acquisitions, my prediction is that isn't going to change either. In fact, the pace of those is likely to accelerate. What we see in economic downtimes is coming together of firms. Opportunities that new firms see to acquire other partners in their industry, the opportunity to maybe bring together conglomerates to create more power in the marketplace. It's a recent study that I did with a colleague, a German colleague, on M&As, demonstrating the power of coaching to facilitate the M&A, bringing together the assumptions, the values and beliefs, because those are the factors that often derail the mergers, and through that process and realignment of those aspects enables the merger and acquisition more likely to be successful. Final two here. One of those, in some respects, has been a lot of the work that I've done is about creating a space for senior leaders, a space where they can reflect and be challenged by an independent coach who can sit with them and enable them just to have that space out from the day-to-day, to think critically about what they're doing, to have their feet held across the fire in a supportive way that enables them to develop new insights from somebody who doesn't have a vested interest. So that critical thinking space can be amazingly useful. And of course, a lot of us in coaching have talked about the value of well-being and the benefits that coaching can offer employees to feel heard, to feel empathized with, to feel listened to. It was important during COVID, and it's still important now. So as I draw together this presentation and come together with you to think about not just 15,000 years ago about how we cared as humans for our fellows in our tribe, to invite you to be thinking about now, as you go back to your workplaces, as you go back to your colleagues, and to think, what are we doing to care for our employees with the same level of care and attention that our ancestors cared for their people? My invitation to you, my challenge to you, is to go back to your workplaces and to take the inspirational day that we have had together to bring about the transformation that you would like to see to deliver that care for your employees. Thank you.